Welcome to a special edition of the Building Texas Show. We're here in Garland, Texas at a Why Texas event, and really the launch event for Why Texas's year. And leading up to an event in June was a legislative review, and then again in September for an innovation summit that will be held in Houston at Dyken Park. And I have an absolute pleasure to sit down with Norman Garza, the executive director of the Texas Space Commission. And I've had a focus on space since, July or August, but I've really been amazed by the work that's happened so quickly. Like, we're still less than 12 months of the Texas Space Commission, but you've rolled out your initiatives. You're now rolling out grants to the right people. And I'm thrilled that you're going to take a few minutes, sit down with us and talk about all aspects of commercial space in Texas. So
yes, sir. Thanks for having me. Absolutely. So House Bill 3447 was passed by the Texas legislature in 2023 and signed by Governor Abbott. It took effect September 1st, but the board of directors, there are 9. It's the governing entity for the new agency called the Texas Space Commission. 3 were appointed by the governor, 3 by the lieutenant governor, and 3 by the House Speaker. That announcement occurred at a major press conference at Johnson Space Center down in Houston in March. The board hired me in July. I quickly started bringing some teammates on in August, and we issued a grant application in September of 2024. So that's a couple of stops and starts on the clock watch there. But to your point, thank you for your comments of how quickly and efficiently we've been trying to move out. We haven't quite hit that 12-month mark when the board was appointed.
Yeah.
We're over the 6-month mark since they hired me, but in a matter of 4 months, between September and January, our SURF grant application was online. Mm-hmm. We received 281 applications from 140 unique entities across the state of Texas. And combined, the total amount requested for the proposed projects is $3.46 billion. Our fund appropriated by the legislature is only $150 million. Yep. So clearly the board has had some robust considerations. They have been reading a lot of applications and proposals. They have been trying to prioritize those as quickly as possible. And we were able to make our first round of awards in January. There were 4, and they all targeted out in West Texas in particular. And then only a week and a half ago or so, it was the second round of awards. The first round was $21.5 million. Mm-hmm. The second round was $47.7 million. And the second round focused on many of the big brands in Texas that have decided on their own already to plant their flags somewhere here and work on some incredible innovation when it comes to space exploration. Yes, the places like what you're thinking, SpaceX, Blue Origin, as well as Firefly, Intuitive Machines, and Starlab. These are companies that have been operating in Texas. They have already put their own skin in the game, and they've already been going after some federal funds as well. So the state of Texas is now coming to the table to help support those initiatives and ensure that they truly get to the next stage so that big things can happen in zero gravity.
And the purpose of the commission is just that. It's economic development.
That's right.
Around commercialized space.
Yes, sir.
And I still think people are saying, what's commercialized space?
Right.
But having been able to interview Two Fish and walk the halls of Intuitive Machines, and Firefly has their lunar lander coming in.
That's right.
This 2 weekends from
That's
there.
right.
Intuitive Machines is getting ready to send
2 companies from Texas sending hardware to the surface of the moon. It is incredible.
Intuitive Machines has done it successfully.
That's right.
They're going to do it again.
That's right.
And that is what matters.
That's
we
right.
want those companies
Yes,
here
sir.
because it's a competitive space across the U.S.
100%.
Utah, Colorado, California, Florida at a lesser degree, but all of these states are competing for these roles. And Texas is where it needs to be.
Bingo. And thankfully, with the leadership of the Texas legislature and Governor Abbott, support from the lieutenant governor, ongoing support from now House Speaker Burrows out of West Texas, all of those companies are positioned perfectly to help Texas really dominate when it comes to the next generation of commercial space exploration. Okay. So those companies that you were describing, I've been told and seen pictures that For example, the feet of those landers, when it lands on the moon, has names of Texans that worked on the project. It'll forever be imprinted on the surface of the moon. That's incredible. So the Space Commission truly is, to your point, more of an economic development organization. I don't have a spacesuit. I don't have launch codes. I don't have keys to a rocket. What we're solving for are two guys in particular who are helping to lead the charge on behalf of all of state government when it comes to space. And they both have the same first names. Dr. Greg Bonin, MD, neurosurgeon, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, and author of House Bill 3447 that established the Space Commission and TARSEC, as well as the fund of $150 million into the SURF grant program. And the other is Governor Greg Abbott. Between the two of them, they are keeping their finger on the pulse when it comes to what's in Texas today and what might be coming soon. So if the Space Commission can be an enabler by helping to ensure that those companies that are located in Texas today don't leave and also expand their existing footprint, that's one solve. The second solve is attracting those companies that aren't yet in Texas to come here, set up shop, and participate in this vast ecosystem that we're trying to truly position Texas to be.
And I want to take the opportunity because when we started thinking about this, and I'm fortunate that I've been in the conversation, around the conversation for a long time, and I pushed on it. I said, well, what does this mean? But the takeaway is Texas A&M is launching their Society for Space Professionals, Space Professional Society, at the university level. They're going to be the second university in the country to have that group, and that's being expanded. But it opened my eyes to it's not just aerospace engineers, rockets, all of that. It really is an element of our economy that's opening up, where we need doctors, lawyers, researchers.
That's exactly right.
Ready to work.
Yes, sir.
And SpaceX, Intuitive Machines wouldn't able to be what they're doing without SpaceX. Mm-hmm. And that's an important part. And if I think of the other companies, Stephanie Murphy and Aegis and everything they're doing it on the backs of SpaceX being able to commercialize and make it affordable to send it into orbit. But it's going to take so much more than just SpaceX. You have to have the enablement around it. And that also makes it not just Houston. Space Center Houston, we know. And the Intuitive Machines campus right there is beautifully located for growth.
Yep.
But so is Kerrville, Texas.
Sure.
Hondo, Texas.
Sure.
All of these Texan cities that have a long aviation history, but more importantly, they invested in an airport 50, 60 years ago that's right now for a whole new industry to come in and take advantage of.
Sure. I often remind folks, or actually ask the question and put you on the spot here, but do you know how many FAA-designated public spaceports there are in Texas?
I could maybe say 2.
That's right. You know where they are?
Well, Spaceport Houston and Starbase. Or whatever Starbase is.
Public. Designated FAA spaceports.
That's an interesting twist.
Yes. So you're right, Ellington Field, just down the road from NASA Johnson Space Center in the Houston area. The second is Midland, Texas.
Really?
Midland, Texas is a spaceport. And they too are positioning themselves to be the strategic location for all of the new things that are coming online, whether that's satellite manufacturing or return and re-entry. Oftentimes we see the images of a capsule falling in the Pacific or the Atlantic or out in the middle of some kind of desert. Why shouldn't West Texas be that location as well? Yeah. There's also new innovative technologies. You mentioned several companies. Another one is Venus Aerospace. Yep. Sassy and Andrew Duggleby. Sassy was appointed by the Lieutenant Governor to be a member of the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors. They're an engine company, but what they're working on is hypersonic technologies that is applicable both for space and for Earth, and moving both military things and or commercial things. Everybody hopefully can recall once upon a time there was an airplane called the Concorde that moved around the world at supersonic speed. Well, what if one day we were able to get on a commercial airplane that moved at hypersonic speed? Yeah. So it's those kinds of innovations that has dual use, both on the commercial side as well as the military side, perhaps, but it still requires a lot of RDT&E, research, development, testing, and evaluation. And those kinds of things can occur, whether it's at Ellington Field as a spaceport or at Midland as a spaceport or anywhere in between as well. So think multiple airports. You mentioned two in particular. I'll brag on another that has made a public announcement that's up here in the DFW area, which is Arlington.
Yeah.
Their city has put some of their own money in partnership with a company to hopefully set up shop and operate as a manufacturer on their site. Every airport in Texas that has available land in an interested community to have some kind of a ownership in commercial space ought to position themselves also to be available for those kinds of things to come into their communities, whether it's the Kerrvilles, Banderas, Hondos, Castrovilles. I grew up in Pleasanton, Texas, just south of San Antonio. There were a lot of communities around the state once upon a time that organized a Spaceport Development Corporation. That's different than an economic development corporation. It doesn't help in terms of getting money from the Space Commission, but what it does is it throws out the signal to the whole world that a certain community has already decided on their own that they want to position themselves for future opportunities when it comes to commercial space. So if more communities in Texas set up a Spaceport Development Corporation, at the very least, they're on the record saying we're open for business.
Yeah. What a powerful testament. And I can think of 10 years ago, general aviation airports were a shrinking asset. And for these rural communities that are saying, well, what do I do with my airport?
Right.
This is a great opportunity.
Absolutely.
And then I want to remind Texans that it's not just rockets. And I want to go back to space impacts your everyday
life
right now.
That's right.
And it's primarily GPS.
Bingo.
Anything on your phone.
Yep.
Any type of communications. That is all fully dependent on satellites going up.
That's right.
Satellites being manufactured. And all of that has a life cycle.
Yes, sir.
It's getting longer or shorter.
Yep.
And if you're not thinking about space in your economic development strategy, we should be paying attention to what you're doing.
Hopefully, because otherwise communities will get left behind. Truly.
Yeah.
This is the next cool thing. It's going to happen. Folks need to be at the table. Otherwise, they will get left behind. But to your point, satellites and communication, that's our way of life. And there is not just the need to ensure our daily lives from a commercial standpoint as civilians is maintained, but there's also a need to ensure that our way of life is protected militarily. And so there's that national defense, homeland security nexus when it comes to space. We've been engaging with the U.S. Space Force in particular. Multiple generals have come to Texas. They've gone to the Valley. They've gone to El Paso. They've gone to Houston. General Garland from Space Systems Command, based at LA Air Force Base in California, came to see Governor Abbott, I believe in October. Our board chair, Gwen Griffin, and I accompanied him to that meeting for that conversation. There is a high interest when it comes to the technologies that are applicable both for the civilian as well as the military side. And if that's not in our minds and at the forefront of why space is important today, whether it's a 5-year-old or my 89-year-old grandmother, then all of our lives will be disrupted one day because of the adversaries around the world that truly want to disrupt the way we live from a military perspective. So I'll leave that in your mind and the listeners' minds as well.
And I would just echo that Texas has the ability to win here. And we're out there doing it thanks to people like you, the board, the commission, and the employers that are making the investment to come here or grow from here.
Yep.
But it is a global concern. This space made the world much smaller.
Yes.
And we do have international partners that are up and coming space societies.
Sure.
So I see Texas leading that innovation, not only across the U.S., but with our global partners as well, our allies.
Yes, sir.
Because we want them to come here and innovate. We want them to come here and invest to be part of what our U.S. Space Force is doing, because it supports our ally network, just like we would in the Navy, just like we would with Air Force. But the Space Force is opening up a whole new conversation of, yes, this is the emerging market. It's the emerging commercial market.
Yep.
Eric Sunby helped me really understand that space is very similar to what we would have thought about the oceans in the 1600s.
Yeah.
That maritime policy, trade.
Yes, huge.
All of that policy that we enacted is what we're having to do.
We are.
outside of orbit now.
That's right.
And there are no rules up there. There are rules, but
Limited and
the lay person doesn't know that those treaties exist. And how does that impact my daily economics? But it does, because it's your phone bill, your communication, and everything else.
Sure. Yeah. When it comes to the international aspect, I'd like to remind everybody that not only did House Bill 3447 require the creation of the board of directors for the Texas Space Commission, it also called to create an executive committee of an advisory consortium. The acronym is TARSEC. And it's 2 people appointed by the governor, 2 by the lieutenant governor, 2 by the House Speaker, as well as a designee from the UT system chancellor, a designee from the A&M system chancellor, and a designee by the Rice president. The latter is because of the legacy that Rice has when it comes to space and its proximity to Johnson Space Center, since President Kennedy made a big speech at the Rice football stadium. So now today, fast forward, member of TARSEC appointed on behalf of the Rice president, his name is David Alexander, Dr. Alexander. He is leading the conversation when it comes to the international importance for space in Texas. AUKUS, that's Australia, the UK, and the US in particular. There are other countries that want to participate. There's things like ITAR that is limiting the kind of information flow between countries and researchers and such as well. But at the end of the day, we have a large presence of international leadership in Houston, Texas in particular, which is helpful. And so Dr. Alexander being at Rice in proximity to Johnson Space Center today, that conversation is taking place. And it's important because companies could decide instead to go operate in France or Japan or Australia. Why shouldn't they instead be operating right here in Texas?
And it begs the question, what happens to Johnson Space Center? Because if I think of how I was raised to think of space, it was NASA, and astronauts are highly celebrated, and we recognize a lot of people make it possible for the astronaut to do that. But that's all public side. And we're making a big jump into private space companies. And today, I still think that's a jump for the average Texan to say, oh yeah, Johnson Space Center, I went to space camp there. That's what I know. I get it. But I don't think that's the whole story. I know that's not the whole story. And I want to encourage them to see, what is this private space industry?
That's a really good point. Our board chair, Gwen Griffin, she's a communicator by trade. She's from that area. She represents companies and associations and STEM groups, you name it. So she always is asking the question, but why space? To help everybody, whichever audience it is, legislators or 5-year-olds in a kindergarten class or whichever grade they are at that age, to understand and appreciate the value of things that occur in space, benefiting the rest of us here, mere mortals on Earth, that won't ever spend time in zero gravity. And it's because of things that can occur better when you're experimenting or when you're actually manufacturing in space. Things like semiconductors, things like fiber optics, things like biotissue. All of these are examples of stuff that we already know today because of other research that has been underway at the International Space Station, of which Johnson supports those missions. And perhaps ISS is going to be decommissioned in the next couple of years or several, depending on who you ask. It's also old, and it also needs to have additional capabilities and capacity. So that's why certain companies here in Texas that are on the Space Commission's radar are trying to solve that challenge by organizing and designing a commercial space station that would be new with contemporary equipment and updated capabilities so that capacity can be met for the production of, whether it's semiconductors or biotissue or fiber optics, you name it, that all come back to benefit us here on Earth. Often when I go to rooms and talk about the Space Commission, describe the $150 million fund, and now I'm able to tell the story of the kinds of entities that are receiving some of our money. Someone inevitably in the room asks, but why space instead of more money for schools or healthcare or roads or public safety? Valid question. And the answer that I provide them is what I just described to you. There is a benefit, and we must be part of that conversation when it comes to the opportunities in space. companies have already decided to set up shop in Texas, which is why Governor Abbott and the legislature has been focusing on what they're doing and how we can continue to help expand that footprint.
It's such an amazing point because it is the move from 100% public funding to now it's a shared public-private conversation.
Sure.
So these private companies are going to build a space station in the story you just said. That means they're investing in it. And I want to reach out to the Texas investor and say, this is where we need Texas investors to be looking.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah. And it's a shame that we're still having to have that conversation.
Sure.
And it's a bigger conversation around the Texas investor itself.
That's right.
But for the Texas investor, this is a source of pride. This is a source of local impact, immediate economic impact.
Yes, sir.
And if you're an investor, an established, accredited investor, you should be watching the Space Commission wholly.
I hope so.
You're going to see the companies at very early stages that have an opportunity to really have a global impact.
Bingo.
Pretty quickly.
That's a great point. And I've learned that there are some Texas investors that are looking for opportunities, but they're going to places like New Mexico because they have a sovereign wealth fund, or other countries because they too have a sovereign wealth fund, or the model for the right kind of partnership with banks and private equity and venture capital, et cetera, to really help enable that cash flow, and or perhaps it's warrants that are held and traded. Perhaps there's more roles for state government to be part of that conversation. There's concepts like an Evergreen fund and how that can benefit all of these major economic indicators in Texas because of those companies that have decided already, to your point, put their own skin in the game, come here, start looking for that investor partnership, but perhaps the regulatory environment or truly the market isn't quite yet there here in Texas. So I believe there are folks that are talking about that, and hopefully we'll see some movement during session down in Austin.
Well, I'd be thrilled to see it. I think it's a source of state pride that we should all celebrate. But to me, the biggest impact is back to those kindergartners.
Yeah.
And every stage of the educational cycle.
Yeah.
We talk about space. We celebrate the astronaut. We talk about the history. What a great opportunity for us to circle back and talk about the future, the workforce development. It is approachable for anybody that's willing to work. Two Fish says it really well.
He does.
You have to be top tier ready to work to be in this industry because you're surrounded by brilliant people that are rocket scientists.
Literally.
But we need the doctors, the
lawyers,
and the
technicians, et cetera. Absolutely. Two Fish, also a member of TARSEC, an appointee by the lieutenant governor as well, talking about things like an analogy of we're only as strong as the weakest person on the team. Everybody needs to be operating at their best. Dr. Greg Bonin, author of House Bill 3447, also uses the analogy of we need to be going where the puck is going, not where we're skating now, but where the puck is going to get tossed or hit, if you will. And that's what is important. Workforce critical, supply chain critical, innovation can't happen without those two elements in particular. The legislature afforded a $150 million fund for these 2 years that we're in now for this biennia. Hopefully there might be some additional resources made available to the Space Commission for the next 2 years. We'll wait and see what unfolds as session continues. And at the end of the day, it's not just those doctors and lawyers and accountants who can participate in the commercial space ecosystem as a career field. It's also those technicians that need to know how to weld, but not like what my dad and I tried to do on the ranch, but instead with stainless steel, these advanced materials that are so important to really make these hardware possible to leave Earth and go into space and come back safely, securely, successfully at the end of the day. 150
million. It sounds like a big number, but it is a drop in the bucket relative to what we spent on space as a nation.
Sure.
And ultimately to what the return could be for the Texas economy, the Texas tax base.
Exponential.
If we have global partners coming to Texas because this is the easiest place to do business. And you're seeing the great workforce. You're seeing the Texas A&Ms of the world that are really pipelining. And Governor Abbott has challenged all of our university systems.
That's right.
To put space as a main driver of their curriculums.
Yes, sir.
So let's applaud that.
Yes.
And if you're a Texan interested in space at all and weren't aware of this, please be aware of it.
Yes.
And then how do you get involved? And that's what,
Sure.
You might be an investor, you might be a student. We need all of you.
Everybody. I encourage everyone to go to our website. It's pretty cool to say.
Yeah.
Space.texas.gov.
Yeah.
Sign up for our email distribution list so that you get all of our press releases and any other opportunities to participate and be involved. But to your Texas pride comment, it is important, and other states and other countries are paying attention to what Governor Abbott and the legislature is doing, not just because of the $150 million fund, of which, thankfully, as an economy, we're sitting very nice.
Yeah.
Again, another big surplus going into this session. We'll see how that gets divvied out. But other states don't have that hard cash.
Yeah.
And they don't have that commitment to be a direct partner with private industry. And I'm hearing from my counterparts in Alabama, in Florida, in California, in Colorado, in Virginia, and Washington State. And $150 million, while it is barely the drop in the bucket, still was enough to catch their attention. And the announcements made here recently by our board for issuing awards is a talk of the town when we were in DC last week. So I think that that's at least an initial win here early into 2025. I can't wait to see what the rest of the year unfolds for the Texas Space Commission.
Well, Norman Garza, thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing so much information with us today. But ultimately, thank you for the way that you're building Texas and making an impact for future generations to come.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching the Building Texas Show. Be sure to follow us across all social media platforms and let us know what you like.